Hello and good morning. You're watching World News on TVP World, live from Warsaw. My name is Sasha Farbach. Kyiv has come under fire for a second straight night as Russia intensifies its attacks on Ukraine, even while its envoy visits Washington, claiming readiness for talks. With winter approaching and energy sites under fire, the U.S. and Europe are boosting support for Kyiv as pressure grows on both the battlefield and in diplomacy. Paolo Jaskowski brings us the latest.
Civilians were again targets of Russia's military in overnight attacks on Ukraine. At least 9 people were reported killed and 45 injured on Sunday, a tragic end to a week of consecutive strikes on residential buildings and civilian infrastructure.
People died. They were young and healthy.
Residents of the country's capital were targeted for the second night in a row.
I was at home with my 2 grandchildren and we heard an explosion and almost fell out of our beds.
A clear sign of attacks escalating.
Kyiv city have never seen that much destruction and that much serious threats.
All this while Russia's envoy was paying a working visit to the US, talking about Russia's readiness to reach a diplomatic solution to end the war.
We are committed to constructive dialogue and to clearly communicating Russia's position on many issues. Yes, Russia wants a peaceful solution, but it certainly requires respect for all of Russia's interests.
But this lower-level visit comes after the Trump-Putin summit in Budapest was ultimately cancelled.
He came to Washington to kind of maybe make it soften the situation that happened last week.
And Trump asserts he will only meet with Putin once the Russian leader is ready to concede some of his demands.
What will Russia have to do for you to reschedule your meeting with Putin?
I'm going to have to know that we're going to make a deal. I'm not going to be wasting my time.
This week, the US also sided with Kyiv by imposing sanctions on Russia's 2 biggest oil companies. Another positive sign for Ukraine, but with a caveat.
This was a good week, but the Trump administration is capable of sudden reversals, and President Trump is capable of that himself.
And as talks with Putin did not pan out, Trump's attention now briefly switched to Southeast Asia.
They're not great questions today, I must say. You know, they're sort of boring questions.
But this week, Europe also showed strong support for Ukraine at a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing.
Ukraine's future is our future.
And all this backing comes ahead of another critical moment in this war.
This is yet another positive momentum of Western support and backing for Ukraine as the winter is coming. This is particularly a key question of timing.
That's because Russia is increasingly targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Kyiv has already asked its international partners to help civilians endure winter, the 4th one in this war. Paweł Trzaskowski, TVP World.
With the Trump-Putin meeting cancelled and Washington making diplomatic overtures to China, the transatlantic landscape is shifting. Kurt Volker, former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations, told World News Tonight that the objective for talks now should not be a peace deal per se, but rather a ceasefire.
Putin does not believe that Ukraine is a legitimate sovereign country. He believes it should be part of Russia. He does not believe that Zelensky is a legitimate leader. He calls him a Nazi. So he's never going to reach a deal. That means our objective should not be the peace agreement per se. It should be a ceasefire, getting enough pressure on Russia that he feels compelled to stop attacking. If we can get Russia to the point of a ceasefire, then we need to accelerate our efforts to integrate Ukraine into transatlantic institutions, EU and NATO, as quickly as possible so that we can solidify that tenuous peace.
Russia is going to immediately feel the pain of American sanctions on its oil sector, said the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. While appearing on CBS's Face the Nation, the official added that India had already stopped purchasing oil from Russia and that China was heading in the same direction.
So this was the 5th meeting that I've had with my Chinese counterpart, the Vice Premier, Hu Lifeng, and we covered a wide range of issues, and I think we've reached a substantial framework for the two leaders who will meet in Korea next Thursday. So, on the table, the president had given me maximum leverage when he threatened 100% tariffs if the Chinese imposed their rare earth global export controls. So I think we have averted that so that the tariffs will be averted.
British and German defense ministers have announced that the two countries will join forces to monitor Russian submarine activity in the North Atlantic Ocean and the Baltic Sea. Under the agreement, air bases in the UK, Germany and Iceland will host the surveillance planes, which apart from tracking Russian submarines, can also engage them using torpedoes. The meeting between British and German ministers was held at the Royal Air Force Base in Scotland, marking the one-year anniversary of a defence cooperation agreement between the two countries. The mission will take place simultaneously with two NATO operations, Operation Baltic Sentry and Operation Eastern Sentry. According to the German Minister of Defence, the surveillance missions will serve to protect critical infrastructure, such as undersea cables, pipelines, and offshore wind farms. The minister also said that NATO's European members can no longer rely on the U.S. for all their defense needs, even going so far as to suggest that the Americans may withdraw their protection from some members of the alliance. Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico is once again challenging the European Union's consensus on Ukraine and Russia. Speaking in Bratislava, he announced that Slovakia will not take part in EU schemes to finance military aid for Kyiv and renewed his criticism of Western sanctions, which he says are backfiring on Europe.
Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico has announced that his country will not join any EU program to fund Ukraine's military efforts, saying the war cannot be solved on the battlefield. Fico, a vocal critic of sanctions against Russia, argues they hurt Europe more than Moscow, a view shared by Hungary, Slovakia's main energy ally.
The only problem could be that we will be buying more expensive crude oil and everything will be more expensive. That is the result of all these sanctions. So it's been confirmed again that the target of the sanctions not harmed, but we who invent these sanctions are harmed.
Fico's stance deepens Slovakia's rift with Brussels as the EU and Washington prepare new measures to tighten pressure on Russia's war economy.
U.S. President Donald Trump has completed the first stop of his diplomatic tour in Asia and has just now landed in Japan for talks with the country's first female prime minister. Trump began his one-week trip to Asia in Malaysia, where he joined the signing of a peace declaration between Thailand and Cambodia. In Tokyo, the U.S. President and Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaishi are expected to discuss Japan's defense capabilities, among other topics. Trump's tour is expected to conclude with a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea on Thursday, where the world's two largest economies will seek to avert an escalation of their trade war. Beyond trade, Trump is expected to urge Xi to join the U.S. to pressure against Russia. A year after disputed elections sparked mass unrest in Georgia, protests continue across the country. With domestic tensions rising and arrests mounting, demonstrators say they'll stay in the streets, demanding fair elections and a return to the EU path, despite tighter government crackdowns. Natalia Komarov reports.
It has been nearly a full year of this, and this.
Georgian people are against of this pro-Russian regime already here. We have everyday protest wave here.
And it all began with the parliamentary election on October 26, 2024. After the Georgian Dream Party declared victory, people took to the streets, believing the results were fraudulent.
Now it is not the time for pessimism. It is time to defend your votes very calmly, decisively and purposefully.
A month later, the government announced the suspension of EU accession talks, which mobilized even larger crowds, especially young people fearing Georgia would fall back under Russian influence. The turnout was not surprising. EU data shows that nearly 3/4 of Georgians would like to see a European future for their country. All year long, protesters have been rallying to demand fair elections and the country's return to its EU path. In response, Georgian Dream introduced harsh regulations, including imprisonment instead of fines for protest-related offenses.
Even though the draconian laws have been adopted, even though the Georgian government is simply kidnapping people from their homes for crimes that they have criminalized only a day ago, even though the Georgian parliament is trying to adopt more and more authoritarian laws, the people are protesting.
Over the weekend, at least 60 people have been arrested for protesting, as reported by the Georgian Ministry of the Interior. According to the Europe-Georgia Institute, the country now has more political prisoners per capita than Russia.
It is becoming extremely challenging to sustain these street protests, not because people are getting fatigued, not because the critical sentiment is decreasing, but simply because this immense power imbalance makes it impossible to sustain the street process and to withstand governmental and regime's pressure.
But even though the situation becomes increasingly difficult, big gatherings are expected across Georgia on October 28, which will mark exactly 365 days since the first rally on Rustaveli Avenue, the main street of Tbilisi. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
Slovenia's Justice and Interior Ministers resigned on Sunday at an emergency cabinet meeting called by Prime Minister Robert Golob. It was convened following the murder of a man in the southeastern town of Novo Mesto. The leader said the incident highlighted the need for a stronger security response nationwide.
I believe that the police will have to respond immediately with somewhat stricter or even very strict measures to make it clear that our goal is to ensure safety. I think the Prime Minister must understand that we cannot expect individual ministers to provide the solution, but that he himself will have to take over the coordination or assign someone in the Prime Minister's office to be responsible for this coordination.
Spanish police have boarded a ship over 900 kilometers off the Canary Islands and seized 4 tons of cocaine found in hidden compartments. All 9 crew members on board the ship were arrested. The operation took place on October 22nd and was jointly coordinated by the Spanish Special Anti-Drug Prosecutor's Office and the Spanish Navy. It followed a U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration tip about an international trafficking network moving a large shipment across the Atlantic. According to investigators, the Tanzanian-flagged supply ship had non-standard structures believed to be storing the narcotics. The final destination of the vessel was the port of Vigo in Spain. In Bucharest, the National Cathedral hosted a historic religious event this weekend, celebrating the consecration of its iconography and the 100th anniversary of the Romanian Patriarchate.
The monumental National Cathedral of the Salvation of the Nation in Bucharest became the spiritual heart of Romania on Sunday as it hosted the consecration of its interior iconography, a landmark ceremony for the Romanian Orthodox Church. Bartholomew I of Constantinople and Patriarch Daniel of the Romanian Orthodox Church led the consecration service. Access was limited to about 3,000 official guests, while an estimated 8,000 pilgrims gathered on the esplanade outside. Among notable guests were Romanian President Nicos Ordan, Prime Minister Ile Bolohan, former presidential candidate George Simeon, as well as Moldova's President Maia Sandu. The Romanian Orthodox Church became independent in 1885 and a patriarchate in 1925, celebrating its centenary this year. Dominating Bucharest's skyline at 132 meters, the National Cathedral is the tallest and largest Eastern Orthodox church in the world. It also houses the world's biggest Orthodox iconostasis and the heaviest free-swinging church bell.
And now for a bit of culture. Hundreds of cyclists, skaters, and pedestrians followed a British DJ for a drum and bass ride through Spain's capital, Madrid, on Sunday. Tom Whiting, known as DJ on the Bike, rides through towns and cities on a bike modified with speakers and decks, attracting a huge social media following.
We're here for drum and bass. To be healed by drum and bass.
I've followed drum and bass on the bike on Instagram for a year, and I was literally cried tears of joy when I found out that they were coming to Madrid, because it's been a dream of mine for literally so long.
Yeah, drum and bass on the bike is a movement I started in 2021 during the height of lockdown or coronavirus, COVID, however you want to call it. And it was really born from us not being able to be a community. We couldn't have music, we couldn't meet our friends, our family. So I had to come up with a way to get people out, exercise, and also have music. Every ride I do is always getting better. And I feel like that comes down to a lot of effort that's put into the rides themselves. Just to do a ride, it's not just the one day, it's 7 days or sometimes 14 days of build up, charging, driving, flying, social media. So yeah, it's still just as good as it was, if not better than when I first started.
And on that good high note and beats, we conclude this World News session. But stay tuned, there's much more coming up right here on TVP World, so don't go away.